I didn't know his name, but the moment I touched him, the world went quiet. The rain hit hard enough to sting my skin, each drop sharp like it was trying to push me back, but I kept running anyway, my breath coming in short, broken gasps as my sneakers slapped against the wet pavement, slipping just enough to remind me I could fall at any second, and behind me, I could still hear him calling my name. Louder now, closer, like he knew I was running out of places to go. Like he always knew exactly how far I could get before I broke, and I couldn't let that happen again. Not tonight. Not after everything. Not after I finally found the courage to leave. So I ran past closed storefronts and flickering streetlights, past strangers who didn't look twice, past cars that sped through the rain like I didn't exist, until my chest burned and my legs trembled, and I realized I had nowhere left to go, nowhere to hide, nowhere to disappear. And that's when I saw him, standing perfectly still beneath the dim glow of a street lamp, like the storm didn't touch him at all, like the rain bent around him instead of falling on him, tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in dark clothes that looked too sharp for a night like this, too clean, too controlled, and something about him felt wrong, not dangerous in the loud way I was used to, but in a quiet, certain way that made everything else feel small, and I should have kept running. I should have turned the other way, but my body didn't listen, because behind me, Ryan's voice cut through the rain again, closer now, angry, desperate, and I panicked. I didn't think. I just moved, straight toward the stranger, my hands reaching out before my mind could catch up, and then I was there, pressed against him, my fingers gripping the front of his coat as I buried my face against his chest like he was something safe, like he was mine, like I had any right to touch him at all, and for 1 second, just one, everything stopped, the rain, the noise, even my own breathing. Because he didn't push me away, he didn't flinch, didn't even take a step back, he just stood there, solid and still, like he'd been expecting me, like this moment had already happened somewhere before, and I felt it then. The shift, subtle but real, the way the air changed around us, heavier, sharper, like the city itself was holding its breath, and I slowly lifted my head, my heart pounding so hard it blurred everything else. And that's when I heard it. Engines, more than one, low and controlled, not fast, not chaotic, just precise. And headlights cut through the rain from the corner of the street, bright and white, and too many, reflecting off the wet asphalt in long, stretching lines, and the cars didn't rush, they didn't hesitate, they moved like they knew exactly where they were going, like they had always been coming here, like they had always been coming for him. And suddenly the man I was holding didn't feel like a stranger anymore. He felt like the center of something I didn't understand, something bigger than my fear, bigger than Ryan, bigger than anything I had ever tried to escape. And behind me, Ryan's footsteps slowed, then stopped completely, the silence louder than anything he had shouted before, and I felt the man's hand finally move, not rough, not urgent, just steady as it settled lightly against my back, holding me there like I wasn't leaving, like I couldn't leave. And when he spoke, his voice was low, calm, and far too certain for someone standing in the middle of a storm. You picked the wrong night to run. I did not move, not because I trusted him, but because something in the way he said it made it feel like moving would not matter, like whatever had already started could not be undone. And the rain kept falling, steady and relentless, soaking through my clothes, dripping from my hair, but the hand on my back did not shift, did not tighten, just stayed there like a quiet decision that had already been made. And the cars came to a stop around us in a slow, deliberate circle, engines idling low, doors opening one by one with soft, controlled clicks that sounded louder than they should have in the empty street. And men stepped out, all in dark suits, their movements precise, their eyes scanning everything except him, except the man I was still holding on to like he was my only anchor. And that was when I realized something that made my stomach drop. They were not looking for him. They were waiting on him. And behind me, Ryan let out a breath that I had never heard from him before. Not anger, not control, something smaller, something uncertain, and I felt it ripple through the space between us like a crack in glass. Emily, he said, but my name sounded different now, weaker, like it did not belong to him anymore. And I did not turn around. I could not, because the man in front of me shifted just slightly, just enough that I had to look up at him again. And for the first time, I saw his face clearly, rain tracing the sharp lines of his jaw, dark eyes steady and unreadable, not cold, not warm, just aware in a way that made me feel completely seen, like every bad decision I had ever made was written somewhere he could read without asking. And his gaze dropped briefly to where my hands still clutched his coat, then back to my face. And something almost like recognition flickered there, so fast I almost missed it. You can let go now, he said quietly, but his hand did not leave my back. And that contradiction held me in place more than any force could have. And slowly, my fingers loosened, but I did not step away, not yet, because behind me, I could hear Ryan shifting, restless, like he was deciding whether to stay or run. And one of the men from the cars moved closer, stopping just a few feet away, his posture straight, his attention fixed on the man in front of me, not on me, not even on Ryan, just him. Like nothing else in this moment mattered. Sir, he said, calm, controlled. We need to move. And the word sir landed heavier than it should have, because it carried something else beneath it, something that made everything suddenly make sense in the worst possible way. And I felt my breath catch as I finally understood that I had not run into safety. I had run into structure, into power, into something organized and deliberate and far beyond anything I could escape on my own. And Ryan took a step forward, then stopped again, his voice uncertain now. I did not know she was with you, he said, and the words hung there, wrong in a way I could not fully explain, because I was not with anyone. I had just met him. I had just grabbed onto him out of fear, but the man in front of me did not correct him, did not deny it. He just tilted his head slightly, considering, as if Ryan's words were not entirely incorrect, and then his hand finally moved, not pushing me away, but guiding me just enough to shift me to his side, placing me there like I belonged in that space, like it had always been mine. And when he spoke again, his voice was still calm, still quiet. But there was something else in it now, something final. You should leave, he said, not to me, but to Ryan, and no one raised their voice. No one stepped forward. Nothing dramatic happened, but the meaning was clear in a way that did not need to be explained, and for a long second, no one moved. Not even the rain seemed to fall as loudly, and then Ryan backed up, just one step, then another, his eyes flicking between me and the man beside me like he was trying to understand something too late. And I stood there, barely breathing, barely thinking, because the truth settled in slowly, heavy and undeniable. I had not escaped anything. I had changed directions, and I had no idea where I had ended up. The space he created for me at his side felt small, but it changed everything. Like stepping half an inch to the left had rewritten the rules of the night, and I could feel it in the way the men in suits adjusted without looking at me directly, the way their attention sharpened just enough to include me without questioning why I was there. And that was the part that unsettled me the most. Not the cars, not the rain, not even Ryan backing away into the shadows, but how easily I had been placed into something I did not understand, like I had always been meant to stand exactly here. And I swallowed hard, my throat dry despite the rain, trying to find my voice, trying to remember how to speak like this was still normal, like I was still the girl who worked double shifts and counted tips at the end of the night. I did not mean to, I said quietly, not even sure what I was apologizing for touching him, for pulling him into my mess, for not knowing who he was. But he did not answer right away, and the silence stretched just long enough to make me aware of everything. The hum of engines, the faint scent of rain on asphalt, the steady warmth of his presence just inches away. And then he glanced down at me again, not impatient, not annoyed, just considering, like he was deciding something that had nothing to do with what I had said. You ran because of him, he said, his voice even, not a question, and I nodded before I could stop myself, because lying suddenly felt useless, like he would see through it before I even finished the sentence, and he shifted slightly, just enough that I felt the movement rather than saw it. And one of the men stepped forward again, closer this time, lowering his voice as if the street itself could hear. Sir, we should not stay exposed. And the word exposed made my chest tighten, because it confirmed what I had already started to feel, that this was not random. This was not just a group of wealthy men in expensive cars. This was something structured, something careful, something that did not leave details to chance. And I looked at him again, really looked this time, trying to place him somewhere in the world I understood, but there was nothing familiar about him, not his calm, not his control, not the way everything around him seemed to orbit without effort. And then he did something that caught me off guard completely. He reached into his coat slowly, deliberately, not threatening, just precise, and pulled out a small, folded handkerchief, clean and white despite the storm, and handed it to me without a word. And for a second, I just stared at it, confused, until I felt it, the sting on my lip, the faint taste of metal I had ignored until now, and I realized he had noticed before I did. And that realization hit harder than anything else, because it meant he had been paying attention. From the moment I touched him, maybe even before, and I took it carefully, my fingers brushing his for the briefest second, and even that small contact felt deliberate, like nothing about him happened by accident, and I pressed the fabric lightly to my lip, my hands still shaking. "Thank you," I whispered, and he nodded once, as if that was expected, as if gratitude was just another step in a process I did not understand. And then he looked past me, his attention shifting with quiet authority, and the men responded instantly, doors opening, positions adjusting, the entire scene reorganizing in seconds without a single raised voice. And I felt it again, that shift, that pull, like the night was moving forward whether I was ready or not. And his hand returned, not gripping, not forcing, just guiding, resting lightly at the small of my back as he turned slightly toward the nearest car. And I hesitated, just for a second, my mind catching up to what was happening, to where this was going, to the fact that stepping forward meant leaving everything I knew behind. Even if it had been broken, even if it had been painful, it had still been mine. And he paused when I did, just enough to let me feel that the choice existed, even if it did not really. And then he spoke again, quieter this time, closer, meant only for me. "If you stay here," he said, "you go back to him." And I felt the truth of that settle deep in my chest, heavy and undeniable. And I looked at the open car door, at the dark interior that revealed nothing, and then back at him, at the man I did not know but somehow already felt tied to in a way I could not explain. And I took a breath that tasted like rain and fear and something else I could not name. And I stepped forward. The moment I stepped closer, the world behind me disappeared, not all at once, but in pieces, like the sound of the rain fading under the quiet click of a car door opening, like the weight of everything I had been running from slipping just out of reach. And I hesitated right at the edge, my hand hovering for half a second before I lowered myself into the back seat, the leather cold against my damp skin, the air inside dry and still, untouched by the storm outside. And as soon as I was in, the door closed with a soft, final sound that felt louder than anything that had happened so far, like a line being drawn that I could not step back across. And for a second, I just sat there, my hands in my lap, still holding the white handkerchief, my breath uneven as I tried to process how quickly everything had shifted, how I had gone from running down a sidewalk to sitting inside a car that did not feel like it belonged to the same world. And then he moved, sliding in beside me with the same controlled ease he had shown from the beginning, his presence filling the space without crowding it, without touching me, but close enough that I could feel the warmth of him through the cold air, and the door shut on his side, sealing us inside together. And just like that, the outside noise vanished completely. No rain, no footsteps, no voices, just the low hum of the engine and the faint sound of my own breathing. And I stared straight ahead, my fingers tightening slightly around the fabric in my hand as the car began to move, smooth and steady, like it had been waiting for this moment the entire time. And I realized I had no idea where we were going, no idea what I had just agreed to. And that thought should have made me panic. It should have made me reach for the handle, demand to be let out. But instead, I stayed still, because something about him made panic feel ineffective, like it would not change anything, like the outcome had already been decided the second I ran into him. And I swallowed, finally finding my voice again. "Where are you taking me?" I asked, my tone softer than I intended, not demanding, just needing something to hold on to. And he did not answer right away. Of course he did not, because nothing about him was rushed, nothing was reactive. And when he did speak, his voice was calm, steady, like he was stating something simple. "Somewhere you can breathe," he said, and I almost laughed at that. Not because it was funny, but because it felt impossible, because I had not been able to breathe properly in months, not in my apartment, not at work, not anywhere Ryan could reach me. And now I was supposed to believe that stepping into a stranger's car would fix that. But I did not argue. I did not push, because deep down, I knew he was not offering comfort. He was stating a fact, and that difference mattered more than I could explain, and I turned my head slightly, just enough to look at him again. Really look this time without the chaos of the street around us. And up close, he was even more unreadable, his expression composed, his eyes steady, watching the road ahead like everything was exactly where it should be, and I realized something else then, something that made my chest tighten. He was not surprised by me, not confused, not even curious in the way most people would be. It was like I had entered a space he had already accounted for, like I was not an interruption, I was a variable he had expected, and that thought sent a quiet chill through me, because it meant this might not have been as accidental as I thought, and before I could stop myself, the question slipped out, "Who are you?" And this time, he did not delay, did not deflect, he simply turned his head slightly, his gaze meeting mine for a brief second that felt longer than it should have. And there was something in that look, something steady and certain that made it hard to look away. "Someone your ex should not have followed," he said, and the words settled into the space between us, heavy and clear, and I felt my grip tighten again around the handkerchief as the city lights blurred past the window. And for the first time since I started running, I understood that I had not escaped danger. I had stepped into a different kind of it, quieter, controlled, and far more powerful. The car moved through the city like it belonged to a different timeline, smooth and uninterrupted, as if traffic lights and crowded intersections simply chose not to interfere, and I watched the streets blur past the tinted window, familiar places turning unfamiliar under the rain and distance. The small diner on 8th Street where I used to grab coffee after late shifts, the corner pharmacy with the flickering neon sign, the bus stop where I had stood too many nights checking over my shoulder. All of it slipping away one block at a time, and I felt it then, not relief, not yet, but separation, like the life I had been clinging to was quietly being erased behind me, and I tightened my grip on the handkerchief again, grounding myself in something real, something simple, because everything else about this moment felt too controlled, too intentional, and I turned slightly toward him again, studying the details I had missed before, the clean line of his coat, the stillness in the way he sat, the complete absence of restlessness, like he did not react to the world. The world adjusted to him, and it made something uneasy settle in my chest, not fear exactly, but awareness, the kind that tells you are standing too close to something you do not understand. And I exhaled slowly, trying to steady my voice. "You knew him," I said, because the way Ryan had spoken, the way he had stopped, it had not been confusion, it had been recognition, and that mattered. And for a moment, there was only the quiet hum of the engine again, and I wondered if he would ignore me, if my questions even registered as something worth answering. But then he shifted his gaze slightly, not fully turning, just enough that I knew he had heard me. "I know of him," he said. And the distinction was subtle but deliberate, and I frowned slightly, trying to piece that together. "He owes people," he continued, his tone unchanged, as if he was explaining something ordinary, something that did not carry weight, but I felt the weight anyway. It pressed into my chest, into my thoughts, because I had always known Ryan had problems, always known there were things. He did not tell me, but hearing it like this, in this calm, detached way, made it feel real in a way it never had before, and I looked down at my hands, at the faint tremor still there. "He never told me," I said quietly, more to myself than to him, and he nodded once, like that confirmed something he had already assumed. "He would not," he replied, and there was no judgment in his voice, no surprise, just certainty, and that certainty made me look back up at him, because it meant he understood Ryan better than I did, better than I ever had. And that realization shifted something inside me again, because it meant I had been blind, or maybe just hopeful, and neither of those things felt safe anymore, and I leaned back slightly into the seat, the leather cool against my shoulders, letting out a breath I did not realize I had been holding. "So what happens now?" I asked, because that was the question that mattered, the only one that mattered, and for the first time since I had met him, there was the faintest pause, not hesitation, not uncertainty, just a moment where he seemed to choose his words with more care, and when he spoke, his voice was still calm, still controlled, but there was something else beneath it now, something that felt almost like warning. Now, he said, you stop being within his reach. And the way he said reach made it sound like distance was not measured in miles or streets, but in something else entirely, something I did not yet understand, and I felt a quiet tension settle in my chest again, because part of me wanted to believe him, wanted to believe that stepping into this car had changed something, had created a line Ryan could not cross, but another part of me knew that nothing in my life had ever been that simple, and I looked back out the window, watching the rain streak across the glass, distorting the city lights into something softer, something almost unreal, and I realized I had not asked the most important question yet, the one that had been sitting just beneath everything else, and I turned back toward him, my voice quieter this time, more careful. And what does that make me? I asked, because I was no longer just running, I was somewhere else now, somewhere I had not chosen in any real way, and I needed to understand what that meant. And he finally turned his head fully toward me, his eyes meeting mine with that same steady intensity that made it hard to look away, and for a second, the car, the rain, the city, all of it faded again, leaving just that moment, just that look. And when he answered, his voice was low, certain, and impossible to ignore. It makes you mine to protect, he said, and something in my chest tightened, not fear, not entirely, but something close to it. Something that felt like the beginning of a choice I was not sure I could undo. His words did not feel loud, but they landed heavier than anything else he had said, settling somewhere deep and impossible to ignore. And for a moment, I just stared at him, trying to understand what that meant, what I was supposed to do with that, because no one had ever said something like that to me without expectation, without control attached to it. And yet there was something about the way he said it that made it clear this was not a question, not an offer I could negotiate. It was a statement, simple and final. And I felt my chest tighten as I looked away first, back toward the rain-streaked window, needing distance even if it was just a few inches, because staying in that moment felt like standing too close to a line I did not know how to cross back from. And the city outside had started to change, the narrow streets giving way to wider roads, the buildings growing taller, cleaner, quieter, like we were moving into a part of the city that did not belong to people like me. And I could feel that shift in my body, in the way I sat a little straighter without meaning to, in the way my voice came out softer when I finally spoke again. I am not yours, I said, not strong, not defiant, just true, because I needed it to be true. And there was a small pause after that, not tense, not sharp, just a space where my words existed between us. And then he nodded once, like he had expected that answer, like it changed nothing. No, he said calmly, you are not. And for a second, relief flickered, small and fragile, until he continued, his tone unchanged, but you are, under my protection. And the way he said protection made it feel less like a shield and more like a boundary, something that surrounded me whether I agreed to it or not. And I swallowed, my fingers tightening again around the now damp handkerchief. That is not the same thing, I said, because it mattered, because I needed it to matter. And this time, he turned his head fully toward me, his gaze steady, measuring, not dismissing me, not correcting me, just acknowledging. It is, in my world, he replied. And that was the first time he had said anything that made it clear there was a difference, a line between his world and mine, and I felt it. Then, that divide, quiet but absolute, and I realized I had stepped across it without even noticing. And the car slowed slightly, turning onto a long, tree-lined drive that curved away from the main road, the city noise fading even further until it was almost gone, replaced by a kind of silence that felt deliberate, like it was meant to keep things out, or maybe keep things in. And I leaned forward just a little, looking through the windshield as the gates ahead came into view, tall, dark iron, opening smoothly before we even reached them, like someone had been watching, waiting, and I felt a small, involuntary breath catch in my throat, because nothing about this was accidental, not the timing, not the movement, not even me. And the car passed through the gates without slowing, the drive stretching out ahead lined with soft lights that reflected off the wet pavement in long, quiet patterns, and I sat back again slowly, the reality of where I was going settling in piece by piece, not all at once, but enough to make my thoughts feel heavier, slower, and I turned toward him again, because I needed something real to hold on to in all of this, something clear, If I am under your protection, I said carefully, choosing each word like it mattered, because it did. What does that cost? And the question hung there, quiet but sharp, because nothing in my life had ever come without a cost. Not safety, not help, not even kindness. And I watched him closely this time, waiting for the shift, the expectation, the condition, but he did not look away, did not hesitate, did not smile. Nothing you cannot afford, he said, and the answer should have reassured me. It should have made this easier, but it did the opposite, because it told me he already knew exactly what I could afford, and that meant he knew more about me than he should, more than I had ever told him, more than I had ever told anyone. And as the car came to a smooth stop in front of a house that looked less like a home and more like something built to last longer than the people inside it, I realized something else, something quiet and unavoidable. I had not just left my old life behind. I had been brought somewhere new, somewhere that already knew my name before I ever said it. The engine went quiet, but the silence that followed felt louder, heavier, like the car itself was holding its breath, and for a second I did not move, my hand still wrapped around the damp handkerchief, my eyes fixed on the house in front of me, because calling it a house did not feel right, not with the way it stood there, tall and still, its windows glowing softly against the night, its structure too precise, too deliberate, like it had been designed to be seen and not approached, and I felt something shift inside me again. Not fear, not exactly, but awareness, the kind that settles in your chest and tells you that whatever happens next matters more than anything that came before. And I exhaled slowly, my breath fogging slightly against the window before fading, and the door opened beside me before I could reach for it. One of the men from earlier standing there, his posture straight, his expression neutral, not looking at me directly, but waiting, always waiting, and I hesitated, just for a second, because stepping out felt different than stepping in. It felt like a decision instead of a reaction, and I glanced at him, at the man beside me, because somehow that mattered, even now, and he was already watching me, not urging, not commanding, just present in a way that made it clear he expected me to choose, even if the choice had already been made. And I swallowed, then shifted forward, my shoes meeting the ground with a soft sound as I stepped out into the cool night air, the rain lighter now but still falling, and the moment I stood fully outside, I felt it again, that subtle shift, like the space itself recognized where I was, like I had crossed into something contained, something intentional, and the door closed behind me with that same quiet finality, and I wrapped my arms around myself instinctively, not from the cold, but from the unfamiliar stillness, because there were no city sounds here, no distant traffic, no voices, just the faint rustle of trees and the soft patter of rain, and it made everything feel sharper, clearer, like there was nowhere for anything to hide. And I looked up at the house again, really looking this time, at the tall windows, the clean lines, the way the lights inside did not flicker or dim, steady and controlled, and I felt something tighten in my chest, because this place was not just safe, it was structured, it was watched, it was owned in a way I did not understand. And I heard the car door close behind me, his door, and then his footsteps, measured, unhurried, closing the distance between us until he stood just slightly behind my shoulder, not touching, but close enough that I could feel his presence without turning. And for a moment, neither of us spoke, and that silence stretched in a way that did not feel empty. It felt deliberate, like he was giving me space to see it, to understand where I was before anything else happened. And I found myself speaking before I could stop it, my voice quieter than I intended. "This is your world," I said, not asking, just stating what had already become obvious. And there was a slight shift behind me, the faint sound of him adjusting his stance, and then his voice, calm, steady, right where I expected it to be. "Yes," he said, and there was no hesitation in it, no need to explain or justify, just certainty, and I nodded slowly, even though he could not see it, because that answer settled something inside me, something that had been waiting for confirmation, and I turned then, finally facing him fully again, the soft light from the house catching the edges of his features, making everything sharper, more defined, and for a second, I forgot to be afraid, forgot to question, because there was something about the way he stood there, completely at ease in a place that felt overwhelming to me, that made it hard to look away. And I realized something else then, something that made my breath catch just slightly. This was not just his world. It was a world he controlled, and I was standing in it, uninvited but not unwanted. And that distinction mattered more than I wanted it to. And I tightened my grip on the handkerchief one more time before, letting it loosen slightly in my hand, grounding myself again. And me, I said carefully, meeting his gaze, because I needed to understand where I fit in all of this, if I fit at all. What am I in it? And for a second, his expression did not change, his eyes steady, his posture unchanged. But there was something there, something subtle, something that felt like recognition again. And when he answered, his voice was low, controlled, but there was no hesitation, no doubt. Someone I do not let go of once I have found, he said, and the words settled into the quiet around us, soft but absolute. And I felt it then, not fear, not safety, but something in between, something that felt like standing at the edge of a life I had not chosen, but might not be able to walk away from. His words did not echo, but they stayed, settling into the quiet space between us in a way that made it impossible to ignore, and I felt my breath catch just slightly, not because of what he said, but because of how certain he sounded, like letting go was not something he considered an option, and that thought should have made me step back, should have made me create distance, but instead I stayed where I was, my feet rooted to the ground as I tried to make sense of the feeling building in my chest, something unfamiliar, something that was not quite fear and not quite trust, just awareness that I was standing in front of someone who did not speak in possibilities, only in decisions. And the rain softened around us, turning into a quiet mist that clung to the edges of everything. And for a moment, neither of us moved, the space stretching in that same deliberate silence that seemed to follow him everywhere, until the front door of the house opened without warning, light spilling out across the steps in a warm, steady glow, and a man stepped into view, older, composed, dressed just as precisely as the others, his posture straight but relaxed in a way that suggested familiarity, not tension, and his eyes moved first to him, then to me, not questioning, not surprised, just assessing, like my presence had already been accounted for somewhere I could not see. "Everything is prepared," he said calmly, his voice smooth and controlled, and I felt that shift again, that quiet confirmation that nothing here happened by chance, not even the timing of a door opening. And I glanced back at him, searching for something in his expression, some indication that this was unusual, that I had changed something by being here. But there was none, just that same steady calm, that same certainty that made everything feel like it was unfolding exactly as it should. And he gave a slight nod toward the man at the door, a small movement that carried more weight than any command I had ever heard. And then his attention returned to me, not pushing, not pulling, just waiting, and I realized then that this was another choice, or at least the illusion of one, step forward or stay, exactly where I was. And I looked past him toward the open doorway, at the light, the warmth, the space that felt so different from the rain and the street and everything I had left behind, and my chest tightened again, because stepping inside meant something, even if I could not fully explain what. And I hesitated, just long enough to feel the weight of it, to recognize that this was not just about safety anymore. It was about entering something I did not understand, something that might not let me leave the same way I came in. And I exhaled slowly, my breath unsteady as I shifted my weight forward, one step, then another, the sound of my shoes against the stone steps quiet but real, grounding me in a moment that felt almost unreal. And as I reached the doorway, I paused again, just for a second, turning slightly back toward him, because I needed to ask something that had been sitting just beneath everything else since the moment I got into the car. "If I walk in there," I said softly, my voice barely louder than the rain, "can I walk out?" And the question hung there, fragile but sharp, because it mattered more than anything else I had asked. And he did not answer immediately. Of course he did not. And for a second I wondered if that silence was the answer, if the lack of reassurance was all I needed to understand. But then he stepped closer, not enough to touch, just enough to close the distance between us again, his presence steady, undeniable. And when he spoke, his voice was low, calm, and impossibly clear. "You can," he said. And there was a brief pause, just enough for hope to flicker, before he added, "But you will not want to," and something In the way he said it made my chest tighten again. Not from fear, not entirely, but from the quiet certainty behind it. Like he was not predicting my choice. He was already sure of it. And I turned back toward the doorway slowly, my hand lifting just slightly as I crossed the threshold, the warmth of the house replacing the chill of the rain in an instant. And the moment my foot stepped inside, I felt it, that same shift again, subtle but absolute, like something had just closed behind me even. Though I had not heard a sound, and I realized then, with a clarity that settled deep in my chest, I had not just entered his world, I had been accepted into it. The warmth hit me first, not overwhelming, not artificial, just steady and controlled, like everything else in this place, and I paused just inside the doorway, my body adjusting before my mind could catch up, the quiet inside different from the quiet outside, heavier in a way that made every small sound feel intentional, the soft click of the door closing behind me, the faint echo of footsteps somewhere deeper in the house, the distant hum of something mechanical I could not see, and I stood there for a second longer than I meant to, my eyes slowly taking in the space around me, the high ceilings, the clean lines, the way the lighting did not flicker or shift but stayed perfectly even, like nothing here was left to chance, and I felt it again, that awareness settling into my chest, reminding me that I was somewhere I did not belong, somewhere that had already decided where everything and everyone fit. And I tightened my grip slightly on the handkerchief before realizing I was still holding it, still carrying something that was not mine. And that realization made me look down for a brief second before I forced myself to look up again, because staying grounded mattered now more than ever. And the man who had opened the door stepped aside just enough to give me space without fully turning away, his presence calm, professional, as if he had done this 100 times before, and maybe he had. Maybe I was not the first person to step into this house unsure of what came next. But the thought did not comfort me. It only made the space feel more structured, more deliberate, and I heard his footsteps behind me again, slower now, unhurried, closing the distance until he stood just inside the doorway as well, and without turning, I knew he was watching, not in a way that pressured me, but in a way that made it clear nothing here moved without his awareness, and I exhaled slowly, stepping forward just a little, my shoes quiet against the polished floor as I moved deeper into the entryway, and the man by the door spoke again, his voice low, controlled. "Miss Carter," he said, and I froze for half a second, the sound of my name landing harder than anything else so far, because I had not told him, I had not said it out loud, not here, not in this place, and I turned slightly, my eyes moving from him to the man behind me, because there was only one explanation that made sense, and he met my gaze without hesitation, without apology, just that same steady calm, and something in my chest tightened again. Because this was confirmation of what I had already started to understand, that he knew more than he should, more than I had given him. And the man by the door continued as if nothing had shifted. "Your room is ready," he said, his tone neutral, respectful, but the words themselves felt anything but simple. Your room, not a place to rest, not somewhere temporary, but something already assigned, already prepared. And I felt a small flicker of resistance rise in my chest, quiet but real, because I had not agreed to this, not fully, not consciously, and I turned more fully now, facing him again, needing to say something, needing to push back even just a little. I did not agree to stay, I said, my voice steady but softer than I wanted it to be, and there was that pause again, that small space where my words existed before his response, and he did not dismiss it, did not override it, he simply stepped closer, just enough to shift the balance between us again, his presence filling the space without force, and his gaze held mine in a way that made it difficult to look away. "You needed somewhere to go," he said calmly, not correcting me, not arguing, just stating something that felt uncomfortably true. And I swallowed, because that was the problem. It was true. I had nowhere else, nothing that felt safe or certain. And he continued, his voice low, measured. "This is where you are for now." And the words "for now" should have reassured me, should have given me something to hold on to. But instead they felt like a boundary I did not understand, something that could stretch or tighten depending on something I did not control. And I looked past him briefly, deeper into the house, at the hallway that extended beyond the entryway, at the quiet order of everything. And I realized something else then, something that settled into me slowly but completely. This place was not just offering me shelter, it was placing me somewhere, and whether I accepted it or not, I was already inside. For now stayed with me longer than anything else he had said, not because it was unclear, but because it was too clear, too controlled, like time itself worked differently here, like now and later were not choices I got to define, and I felt that quiet resistance rise again, small but persistent, because I needed something of my own in all of this, something that was not decided for me before I even understood it. And I took a slow breath, steadying myself, lifting my chin just slightly as I met his gaze again. For now is not an answer, I said, my voice more even this time. Not strong, but not uncertain either. And there was that pause again, that space where he seemed to measure not my words, but me. And I held his gaze even when it felt like too much, even when it felt like he could see through every thought I had not spoken, because looking away would have felt like giving something up. And after a moment, he nodded once, not dismissing me, not correcting me, just acknowledging the line I was trying to draw. Then ask the question you were trying to ask, he said calmly. And that caught me off guard more than anything else, because he was not shutting me down, he was inviting it, and that made my chest tighten in a different way, because it meant he was not worried about the answer, and I hesitated, just for a second, choosing my words carefully, because now they mattered. How long do I stay here? I asked, and the question felt heavier once it was out, like it carried more than just time, like it carried control, choice, everything I was trying to hold on to. And he did not look away, did not shift, just answered, simple and direct. Until you are no longer a risk, and I frowned slightly, the words settling into place slower than I expected. A risk to who? I asked quietly, and this time, there was the faintest change in his expression, not visible to anyone else, but enough that I caught it, something sharper beneath the calm, something that reminded me that I was still only seeing the surface of whatever this was. To yourself, he said, and the answer made me blink, because it was not what I expected, not what I had prepared for, and for a second, I did not know what to say, because that shifted everything again, turning the focus back on me in a way I had not anticipated. And I let out a slow breath, my shoulders easing just slightly as I processed that, because it meant something different than what I had feared, but it still did not feel simple. And I glanced down at the handkerchief in my hand, now wrinkled, slightly damp, something small and real in the middle of everything that was not. And I folded it carefully, more out of instinct than necessity, grounding myself again. And when I looked back up, the man by the door was still there, waiting without watching, present without intruding. And I realized that was part of this too, everything here moved with purpose, even the silence, even the waiting, and I exhaled again, quieter this time. And if I leave before that, I said, not challenging, just needing to understand the edges of this place, the boundaries I could not yet see, and he did not hesitate, did not soften it. You will not be safe, he replied, and there was no threat in it, no warning meant to control me, just fact. And that made it harder to argue with, harder to reject, because it aligned with everything I had already felt, everything that had pushed me into that car in the first place. And I looked past him again, deeper into the house, at the hallway that stretched forward, at the quiet order of everything, and I realized something else, something that settled into me slowly but completely. This was not just about him deciding I stayed. It was about me having nowhere else that made more sense. And that realization was not comforting, but it was honest, and I nodded once, more to myself than to him, before taking a small step forward, then another, moving past the threshold of the entryway and into the house fully. Because whether I liked it or not, whether I understood it or not, this was where I was now. And for the first time since the rain started, I stopped looking for a way out and started trying to understand where I had ended up. The hallway stretched longer than it first appeared, not endless, but intentional, each step forward revealing just enough to keep me moving without ever showing everything at once. And I walked slowly, aware of every small sound my shoes made against the polished floor, aware of the quiet that followed me, not empty, but watchful, like the house itself was paying attention, and I kept my hands close, the folded handkerchief still between my fingers, something familiar in a place that felt anything but, and I noticed the details as I moved. The artwork placed at measured intervals, the soft lighting that never shifted, the absence of anything unnecessary. No clutter, no randomness. Everything chosen, everything placed, and it made me feel like I had stepped into something controlled down to the smallest detail, something that did not leave space for accidents. And that thought lingered as I slowed near a doorway where the man from before stopped, turning slightly to gesture toward it without speaking, and I hesitated again, not because I was unsure what he meant, but because opening another door felt like crossing another line I could not uncross, and I glanced back over my shoulder, because even though I knew he was there, I needed to see it, needed to confirm it, and he stood a few steps behind me, exactly where I expected, not closer, not farther, just present, his gaze steady, his posture unchanged, like he was allowing this distance but not abandoning it, and something about that steadiness made it easier to turn back, easier to reach for the door, and I pushed it open slowly, the movement quiet, controlled, revealing a room that felt different from the rest of the house, softer, warmer, less structured but still deliberate, the bed neatly made, the curtains drawn just enough to let in the faint glow of the outside lights, a small table near the window, a chair placed just slightly off-center, like someone had adjusted it recently, and I stepped inside carefully, my eyes moving across the space, taking it in piece by piece, because this was meant for me, prepared for me, and that thought settled into me in a way that felt heavier than I expected, not comforting, not threatening, just certain, and I turned slowly, facing the doorway again, because even though I had stepped inside, I had not fully accepted it, not yet, and he was still there, just beyond the threshold, not entering, not intruding, just watching in that quiet, controlled way that made everything feel intentional, and I found my voice again, softer now, but steadier than before. You planned this, I said, not accusing, just stating what had become impossible to ignore, and there was that pause again, that space where the truth existed before it was spoken, and he did not deny it, did not soften it. I prepare for outcomes, he said simply, and the answer should have unsettled me more than it did, but instead it clarified something. It confirmed that this was not about me specifically, not at first, it was about control, about being ready for whatever happened, and I just happened to be the outcome he was now adjusting to, and I nodded slightly, more to myself than to him, because that made sense in a way I could understand, even if I did not like it, and I stepped further into the room, letting the door rest open behind me, not closing it yet, not ready for that finality, and I set the handkerchief down carefully on the small table, smoothing it out without thinking, because I needed something to do with my hands, something simple and real. And when I looked up again, he had not moved, still standing there, still watching, and for a moment, neither of us spoke, and that silence felt different now, less heavy, more expectant, like something was about to shift again, and I felt it in the way my chest tightened slightly, in the way my thoughts slowed just enough to focus, and I realized something then, something small but clear. This was the first space in all of this that felt even slightly mine, not because I had chosen it, but because it had been given to me, and that distinction mattered more than I expected, and I took a slow breath, letting it settle, before meeting his gaze again, because I needed one more thing, one thing that had not been said yet. What happens if I decide I do not belong here? I asked quietly, and the question felt different this time. Not reactive, not defensive, just honest. And he did not answer immediately. Of course he did not. And when he finally spoke, his voice was calm, steady, and just as certain as everything else he had said. Then I will show you why you do. And the words did not sound like a promise or a threat, just a fact waiting to unfold. And I stood there in the quiet of the room, realizing that whatever this was, whatever I had stepped into, it was not something I would understand all at once. It was something that would reveal itself piece by piece, whether I wanted it to or not. His words lingered longer this time, not because they were louder, but because they felt closer, like they had crossed the space between us and settled somewhere I could not ignore, and I stood there for a moment without moving, my eyes fixed on him as I tried to understand what that meant, not just the words, but the certainty behind them, because he did not say things to convince. He said them like they were already true, and that was the part that unsettled me, not control, not power, but inevitability, and I exhaled slowly, the air steady this time, less sharp in my chest than before, because something inside me had started to shift, Not trust, not yet, but recognition that fighting every step of this would not change where I was. And I turned slightly, my gaze moving back across the room, taking it in again with a different awareness, the bed, the soft lighting, the quiet order of everything. And I realized that nothing here felt temporary, nothing felt rushed or improvised. It all felt prepared in a way that suggested time, attention, intention, and that thought made me step forward slowly, further into the room, my fingers brushing lightly against the edge of the table as I passed, grounding myself in something physical, something real, and I reached the window, my hand lifting just enough to touch the curtain, pulling it back a few inches, and outside. The rain had softened into a fine mist, the lights along the drive glowing faintly through it, the gates barely visible in the distance, and for a second, I just watched, my reflection faint in the glass, layered over the world I had just stepped out of, and I realized how far it already felt, not in miles, but in something else, something harder to measure. And I let the curtain fall back into place slowly, turning again to face him, because even though I was inside now, even though I had stepped into this space, I was not finished asking questions, not finished trying to understand the shape of what this was, and he had not moved, still standing at the doorway, exactly where I had left him, like the room was mine to enter but not his to take. And that distinction did not go unnoticed. It settled somewhere quiet but important, and I spoke again, my voice steady, softer than before but no longer uncertain. You said I am a risk to myself. I began, choosing each word carefully, because now I understood that words mattered here, they carried weight, and he inclined his head slightly, acknowledging without interrupting, and I continued. Then why does it feel like you already know what I will choose? And the question hung there, not challenging, not accusing, just honest, because that was what I needed now. Not control, not reassurance, just honesty. And for a moment, there was only silence again, that same deliberate quiet that seemed to surround him. And then he stepped forward, just one step, crossing the threshold into the room for the first time. And the shift was subtle but undeniable, like something had just changed even though nothing visible had moved. And he stopped there, not closing the distance fully, just enough to be present in the space with me. And when he spoke, his voice was low, calm, but there was something else beneath it now, something that felt almost like truth stripped down to its simplest form. Because you have already started choosing, he said, and I frowned slightly. The words settling in slower than I expected, because they did not feel like an answer at first. They felt like a reflection, like he was showing me something I had not fully seen yet. And I shook my head lightly. I did not choose this, I said, because that part still felt important, still felt like something I needed to hold on to. And he did not argue, did not correct me. He simply held my gaze, steady and unwavering. You chose to step into the car, he said. You chose to walk inside. And each word landed with quiet precision, not forceful, not harsh, just undeniable. And I felt my breath catch slightly, because he was right, not about everything, but about enough to make the lines between choice and circumstance blur in a way I had not considered before. And I looked down briefly, my hands resting at my sides now, no longer gripping anything, and I realized that somewhere along the way, I had stopped reacting and started moving forward, even if I did not fully understand why. And when I looked back up at him, something in my expression must have changed, because his gaze softened just slightly, not in a way that made him less controlled, but in a way that made him feel present, not just aware. And he spoke again, quieter this time, closer to something I could almost call understanding. You ran because you needed something different, he said, and I felt that settle into me in a way nothing else had, because it was not about him, not about this place, it was about me, about the moment I decided I could not stay where I was anymore. And that truth felt heavier than anything else, because it meant this was not just happening to me. I had stepped into it, even if I had not known where it would lead, and I stood there in the quiet of the room, realizing that whatever came next, whatever this became, it would not be something I could simply walk away from without understanding what I had already chosen. I stood there with his words still settling inside me, not loud, not overwhelming, just present in a way that made them impossible to ignore. And for the first time since the rain started, I did not feel like I needed to move. Did not feel like I needed to run or push back or question every step. Because something had shifted, something quiet but real, and I realized that what he said was not about control. It was about direction. About the moment I chose to stop going back to something that was breaking me and step into something I did not understand yet. And that thought did not feel comforting, but it felt honest, and I let out a slow breath, my shoulders easing just slightly as I looked at him again. Really. Looked this time without the urgency, without the fear clouding everything else, and I saw it then. Not just the control, not just the certainty, but the consistency, the way nothing about him had changed from the moment I touched him in the rain to now. Like he had always been exactly this, steady, deliberate, unshaken. And that steadiness did something unexpected. It gave me something to stand against without feeling like I would fall. And I glanced around the room again, at the space that had been prepared for me, at the quiet order of everything. And I realized that I was no longer asking whether I belonged here. I was asking what belonging would mean. And that was a different question entirely. And I turned back to him slowly, my voice softer now, but clearer than before. And if I stay, I said, not as a challenge, not as resistance, but as a continuation of everything that had brought me here. And he did not interrupt, did not rush to answer, just waited the same way he had from the beginning. And that patience mattered more than I expected, because it meant he was not forcing the moment. He was letting it happen, and I continued. Then what changes? And the question felt different this time. Not about escape, not about fear, but about what came next, about what this became if I stopped seeing it as temporary. And he stepped a little closer, not enough to close the space completely, just enough to make his presence more defined, more real in the room. And when he spoke, his voice was low, steady, but there was something else in it now, something that felt almost like truth without layers. You do, he said, and the simplicity of it caught me off guard, because I had expected something more, something structured, something that explained the house, the protection, the rules, but instead, he brought it back to me again, to what I would become inside all of this, and I felt that settle slowly, deeper than anything else had, because it meant this was not just about where I was, it was about who I would be if I stayed. And I looked down for a moment, my hands still, no longer gripping anything, no longer searching for something to hold on to, and I realized that for the first time, I was not reacting to what was happening around me. I was thinking about what I wanted to happen next, and that realization felt unfamiliar, but not wrong, and I lifted my gaze again, meeting his eyes without hesitation this time, because something in me had steadied, something had aligned in a way I could not fully explain, and I nodded once, not fully committing, not fully surrendering, but acknowledging the path in front of me, and the moment I did, something shifted again, subtle but undeniable, like the space itself had adjusted to that choice. And he did not smile, did not move closer, did not mark the moment in any obvious way, but there was a quiet recognition in his expression, something that said he had been waiting for this, not the answer, but the understanding behind it. And he turned slightly then, stepping back toward the doorway, not leaving, not withdrawing, just giving the space back to me in a way that felt intentional. And I stood there in the quiet of the room, watching him, aware that nothing about this was finished, that this was not an ending. It was a beginning, one that had started the moment I chose not to run. And as the silence settled around me again, softer now, less uncertain, I understood something that I had not been able to see before. I had not been taken. I had not been trapped. I had stepped into something that would change me. And whether I was ready or not, I had already begun to change.